He almost hit the dog. It didn't run, just standing there, injured, watching him like it had something to say. When he tried to help, it pulled away, then turned back, again and again. Not afraid, not confused. It was guiding him. Deep in the snow, it led him to a cabin that didn't feel abandoned, just searched. Inside, he found traces of a man who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. So what would you do? Follow or walk away? Tell me where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subs. The road cut through the mountains like a decision made too quickly and never reconsidered. Caleb Rourke drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely near the gear shift, not gripping, not relaxed, the kind of posture that came from years of training your body to be ready without appearing tense. Colorado stretched out around him in a bright, cold stillness. Snow covered everything in a clean, uninterrupted layer, reflecting the pale winter sun so sharply it made the edges of things feel unreal. There was no storm, no wind, just silence pressed thin over miles of pine and rock. The truck's engine hummed low, steady, familiar. It was older than most things people trusted to get them through the mountains, but Caleb had always preferred machines that told the truth through their flaws. This one rattled slightly at higher speeds and pulled a little to the right when the road dipped. Predictable, honest, unlike people. His phone lay face down on the passenger seat. It had vibrated twice in the last hour. Same number, same persistence. He hadn't answered either time. He didn't need to. Some calls weren't about information. They were about reopening doors that had taken years to close. Caleb exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the road ahead, then the tree line, then back again. Not consciously, just habit. Always reading movement, even when there was none. Especially when there was none. The road curved slightly left. The snow here looked untouched, no tire tracks ahead, no recent traffic, the kind of isolation that felt less like peace and more like absence. That was when it happened. A shape broke from the right side of the road. Fast, too fast. Caleb didn't think. His foot slammed the brake, hands tightening on the wheel as the truck lurched sideways. The tires screamed briefly against the packed snow, then lost traction completely. The vehicle slid at an angle, front end drifting toward the opposite shoulder. For a fraction of a second, everything narrowed. Just motion, angle, timing. He corrected, not aggressively, just enough. The truck shuddered, then stopped, skewed across the road at a diagonal. Silence rushed back in. Caleb's heartbeat didn't spike. It didn't need to. It simply adjusted, slower than panic, faster than calm. He stared through the windshield. The shape hadn't moved. A German shepherd stood in the middle of the road, its body angled slightly, weight uneven, not standing, holding itself upright. Caleb opened the door and stepped out, boots crunching softly against the snow. The cold air hit his face, sharp but clean. He didn't rush forward. He never rushed into unknown variables. The dog didn't run. That was the first thing wrong. Stray dogs ran. Injured dogs crawled away or bared teeth. This one did neither. It stood there, breathing hard, its chest rising in uneven pulls, eyes fixed on him, not wild, not pleading, focused. Up close, the details settled in, black and tan coat, though the tan had a darker, burnt tone along the neck and chest. Snow clung to its back in thin patches. One ear stood fully upright, the other bent slightly at the tip, as if it had once been broken and never set quite right. Its rear leg, left, was bloodied, not torn open, but damaged enough that each shift of weight caused a subtle flinch it couldn't fully hide. Caleb crouched slightly, lowering his center of gravity without making it obvious. "Easy," he said, voice low, even. The dog didn't retreat. It didn't step forward either. It watched, not him, his hands. Caleb noticed. That was the second thing wrong. He moved slowly, reaching out, not directly for the dog, but toward the space in front of it, letting the animal decide the distance. After a moment, it didn't resist when he slipped an arm under its chest and lifted. It was lighter than it should have been for its size, but not fragile. There was strength still there, held tight under exhaustion. He carried it back to the truck and eased it onto the passenger seat. The dog stayed still. No whining, no snapping, just controlled breathing, eyes half-lidded but aware. Caleb shut the door and circled back to the driver's side. He didn't speak again. Didn't need to. The engine turned over. The truck straightened out with a careful adjustment. He shifted into gear. Town was about 20 miles back the way he came. There'd be a vet, or at least someone who could look at the leg. That was the logical path. He drove for maybe 3 minutes. Then the dog moved. Not suddenly. Not violently. It pushed itself upright with a controlled effort that cost more than it showed. Caleb glanced over, one hand steady on the wheel. "Stay," he muttered, not sharply, more out of habit than expectation. The dog ignored him. It shifted its weight then, before Caleb could reach across, pushed against the door. The latch wasn't fully secured. The door cracked open just enough. "Damn it!" The dog jumped. Not cleanly, not smoothly. It hit the snow hard, stumbled, then regained footing in a way that told Caleb everything he needed to know. That injury wasn't stopping it. He braked again, this time controlled, bringing the truck to a halt. For a second, he stayed inside, watching. The dog had moved a few steps away from the truck, then it stopped, turned, looked at him. Not a glance, a hold. Then it took a few more steps, stopped again, turned back, the same look. Caleb frowned slightly. Once could be instinct, twice could be confusion, but the spacing, the rhythm was deliberate. Step, stop, look, step, stop, look. He opened the door slowly and stepped out again. The dog didn't retreat. It waited. Caleb straightened, the cold air cutting sharper now that he wasn't moving. He looked past the dog, into the tree line beyond the road. Nothing obvious, no movement, no sound, just the same stretched quiet. He looked back at the dog. It held his gaze for a moment longer than any animal needed to. Then it turned again and moved toward the trees. 3 steps. Stop. Look back. Something shifted in Caleb's chest. Not emotion, not yet. Recognition. He had seen this before, years ago. Different terrain, different stakes. Dogs trained to guide without vocal command, to lead but not run, to confirm the handler was following without breaking pattern. Not random, not instinct, structured behavior. Caleb exhaled slowly through his nose. "You're not lost," he said quietly. The dog didn't react to the words. But it waited. That was enough. He glanced back at the truck, engine still running, heat still pushing into empty space, 20 miles back, or forward into something undefined. He'd spent years avoiding undefined, avoiding anything that didn't come with clear edges, clear exits. That was how you stayed out of trouble. That was how you stayed alive. The dog took another step, stopped, looked back again, not impatient, not urgent in the way panic demanded, just certain. Caleb reached back into the truck, grabbed his jacket, and pulled the door shut. The engine cut off with a soft final hum. The silence that followed felt heavier. He stood there for a second longer than necessary. Then he stepped forward. "Fine," he muttered. "We'll see what this is." The dog didn't move right away. It waited until he closed the distance between them. Only then did it turn and head into the trees. The trees closed in without warning. One moment, Caleb was stepping off the road into open snow. The next, he was moving through a corridor of pine trunks spaced just irregular enough to break sightlines. The light shifted immediately. What had been clean and reflective out on the road turned muted here, filtered through branches, softened by shadow, broken into uneven patches across the ground. Coda moved ahead, not fast, not slow, just far enough to require attention. Caleb followed without trying to close the distance. His boots sank a few inches into the snow with each step, the crust firm enough to hold, soft enough to record. He kept his gaze low more often now, scanning patterns instead of shapes. No fresh tracks. That was the first thing he noticed. Not just human tracks. None at all. No deer, no rabbits, no broken branches at knee height, no disturbed snow around tree bases. The forest felt paused, not empty, suspended. Coda stopped once, briefly, turning her head as if listening to something too faint for Caleb to catch. Her body didn't tense, no alert posture, just a pause, then movement again. Caleb marked it anyway. They walked like that for several minutes, time flattening into repetition, distance measured by rhythm instead of landmarks. Then the cabin appeared. It didn't rise out of the landscape so much as interrupt it. A structure set slightly off level, built decades ago and never quite corrected. Weathered wood siding, gray where paint had long since surrendered. The roofline sagged just enough to suggest neglect but not collapse. Snow rested evenly along the edges, not blown, not piled, no recent disturbance, at least not from a distance. Caleb slowed before he reached the clearing, stepping behind a thick pine trunk and taking a moment to observe. No smoke, no sound, no movement behind the windows. The windows themselves weren't broken. That mattered. A place abandoned long enough would show it. Glass cracked from freeze and thaw cycles, frames warped, signs of intrusion. This one held its shape too well. Coda didn't approach the door. She stopped at the edge of the clearing, angled slightly toward the structure but not advancing. Caleb watched her, then shifted his attention back to the cabin. "You've been here before," he said quietly. No response. He moved forward. Each step was deliberate now, not cautious in the sense of fear, but precise. Weight placed evenly, eyes moving ahead, then to the sides, then back again. He circled slightly before approaching the front, widening his angle of view. The door was closed, not locked. That distinction came from the way it sat in the frame, aligned, but not tight, a small gap at the top corner where cold air slipped through. Caleb reached for the handle, paused, then instead placed 2 fingers lightly against the wood and pushed. The door opened without resistance. The interior air felt colder than outside. That was wrong. Enclosed spaces held heat differently, even empty ones. But this felt as if the cold had been invited in, allowed to settle. Caleb stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Not rot, not mold, disturbed dust, old wood. Something faintly metallic beneath it all. His eyes adjusted quickly, scanning the room. The layout was simple. A main living space with a table, 2 chairs, a small kitchen area to the right, and a narrow hallway leading deeper inside. Nothing looked overturned. Nothing looked random. That was the second thing wrong. A chair had been moved, not knocked over, just shifted slightly off its usual position. One drawer in the kitchen was open, pulled halfway out, its contents intact. Another drawer beside it had been forced, wood split near the handle, edges rough where pressure had been applied. Caleb stepped closer. He didn't touch anything yet. He crouched instead, studying the floor. 2 sets of prints, boots, one heavier tread, deeper impression, the other lighter, more precise, as if the wearer distributed weight carefully. They crossed the room in intersecting paths, not chaotic, searching. He followed the line of the heavier prints toward the table. They stopped there briefly, weight shifting in place, then continued toward the hallway. The lighter set moved differently, less time in one place, more direction. Caleb straightened slowly. This wasn't a break-in. It was a process. Something had been looked for and found, or not. He turned his attention to the table. Nothing obvious. No valuables. No personal items left in sight. Just a thin layer of dust disturbed in uneven patches. Finger-width streaks where something had been brushed aside or examined. Caleb moved toward the hallway, his steps quieter now despite the boots. Halfway there, he stopped. The drag mark. It ran from the far side of the room toward the door, not straight, but angled slightly, as if whatever had been moved resisted. He crouched again, tracing the line with his eyes. Compressed snow had been carried in on the object, melting and refreezing in a faint, irregular trail. It wasn't fresh, but it wasn't old either. Days, not weeks. Caleb exhaled slowly. At about that moment, something small shifted, not in the room, but just outside. A sound. Soft. Not enough to register as threat, but enough to break pattern. He turned his head slightly toward the door. Coda was still there, standing exactly where she had been, but now her posture had changed. Not rigid, not defensive, intent. Her head angled past the cabin toward something behind it. Caleb held her gaze for a second, then looked back at the room. The open drawers, the forced wood, the intersecting tracks, the drag mark leading out, a search, a removal, and nothing else taken. He walked back toward the door. Coda didn't move when he stepped outside. She only shifted her weight slightly, then took 2 steps to the side, creating a clearer line past the cabin, not inviting, indicating. Caleb glanced once more at the structure behind him. "If this was the point," he said quietly, almost to himself, "you'd have gone in." Coda didn't react to the words, but she didn't move forward either. She waited, that same measured patience from the road, not urging, not pressing. Caleb stepped past her. The space behind the cabin opened into a narrower strip of land, the trees growing closer together again, their branches heavier with snow. He took a few steps, then stopped. The ground looked the same, white, even, undisturbed. Except there. A section no larger than a shallow grave where the snow had settled slightly lower than the surrounding area. Not obvious unless you were looking for difference instead of shape. Caleb didn't move toward it yet. He stood there, letting the pattern form fully in his mind. Cabin, search, removal, and this. He glanced back. Coda had followed, but only to the edge where the shadow of the cabin ended. She didn't step closer. Her eyes moved from him to the patch of snow, then back again. No sound, no urgency, just presence. Caleb nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Not the cabin," he said under his breath. His gaze returned to the shallow depression. Just what's left behind. The snow looked untouched until you stopped looking at it as snow. Caleb stood over the shallow depression, eyes narrowing not in suspicion but in adjustment. It wasn't the kind of irregularity you noticed at a glance. The surface still held its shape, still reflected light the same way as the surrounding ground. But it didn't sit the same. The weight beneath it had settled differently. Subtle compression, slight sag toward the center, deliberate. He didn't move right away. Instead, he shifted his stance slightly, scanning outward, not for movement, but for context. The trees behind the cabin stood close together, their branches heavy with unmoved snow. No broken limbs, no disturbed bark, no recent passage that could be read from distance. If something had been buried here, it hadn't been done in a hurry, or at least not carelessly. Coda remained near the edge of the clearing, just within the shadow of the cabin. She didn't approach the spot, didn't circle it. Her attention stayed fixed, not on the ground, but on Caleb. Watching him, not guiding anymore, waiting. Caleb stepped forward. The snow gave slightly under his weight, but not enough to collapse. He crouched, pressing his gloved hand lightly against the surface. Cold seeped through immediately, but he wasn't testing temperature. He was testing resistance. Packed beneath, not ice, not natural layering. Something had been pressed down, then covered. He exhaled once, slow, then stood and turned back toward the cabin. The truck. Tools. He didn't rush. There was no urgency in his movements, only sequence. Step back, eyes still scanning, a glance to Coda. She didn't follow, didn't move, just watched him leave, as if the next part no longer required her presence. That mattered. He walked back through the trees, the cabin passing through his peripheral vision now instead of holding his focus. Inside it had offered answers in fragments. Outside it had pointed to something else entirely. By the time he reached the road, the truck sat exactly where he'd left it, angled slightly across the lane, engine silent, heat long gone from the cab. Caleb opened the back compartment and pulled out a compact field kit, nothing specialized, just what a man kept when he expected to be on his own more often than not. Folding shovel, battery pack, spare connectors, a length of insulated cable. He paused briefly, then added a small pry bar. Not because he knew he'd need it, because he'd learned not to return twice. The walk back felt shorter, though nothing had changed. When he reached the clearing again, Coda had shifted position, closer now, but still outside the immediate radius of the disturbed snow. Her ears flicked once as he approached. No sound, no warning, just awareness. Caleb knelt at the edge of the depression and unfolded the shovel. The first layer came off clean. Powdered snow, light and loose, brushed aside with minimal resistance. Beneath it, the texture changed, more compact, slightly damp, as if it had been disturbed and then settled again under pressure. He worked methodically, not digging deep, yet, just widening the space, defining the boundaries of whatever lay beneath. The shovel made a soft, dull sound as it cut through the layers, metal against compressed snow, then something firmer below. He stopped, switched to his hands. The gloves dulled sensation, so he pulled one off and pressed bare fingers into the cold. It bit immediately, but clarity mattered more than comfort. Wood. No, not wood. Synthetic casing. He brushed away more snow, revealing a corner, dark, matte, not reflective like civilian equipment. The edges were reinforced, sealed in a way meant to resist more than just weather. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. Not random, he muttered. He cleared the rest of the top surface, exposing a rectangular unit roughly the size of a small briefcase. It had been wrapped in a weather-resistant layer, partially intact but compromised at one seam where moisture had begun to seep in. Not perfectly hidden. Hidden enough. He sat back on his heels, studying it. No immediate markings visible, no obvious identifiers, just a surface that had been designed to not draw attention. That alone said more than any label could. Caleb reached for the pry bar, hesitated, then set it aside. Instead, he used his hands to peel back the outer layer where it had already split. The material gave with resistance, tearing in a controlled line that suggested it had been opened before, then resealed without precision. Inside, the casing was cleaner, military-grade, older generation. He recognized the build, not the exact model, but the philosophy behind it. Durable, redundant, built to function long after it should have failed. The power indicator was dark. Of course it was. He pressed a recessed switch. Nothing. No flicker. No response. Caleb didn't react outwardly. He just nodded once, as if confirming something he already expected. Then he reached into his kit and pulled out the battery pack. This part took longer. He had to open a secondary panel, expose the internal contacts, and adapt the connectors manually. The ports weren't designed for convenience. They were designed for control, access limited to those who already knew what they were doing. Caleb worked without rushing, but not casually either. Each movement had weight, each decision layered on the one before it. At one point, his hands stilled, not because he was unsure, but because something in the configuration triggered a memory that didn't fully surface. A shape of recognition without detail. That was worse than ignorance. He adjusted the connector and locked it in place. The battery pack hummed faintly as it engaged. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a dim flicker, barely visible. Then steadier. A small, recessed screen came to life. Not bright, not modern, but functional. Lines of text began to form, not in a clean interface, but in staggered segments, as if the system was waking in parts rather than all at once. Caleb leaned in slightly. The text resolved slowly. A designation code, then a secondary identifier, then a sequence he hadn't seen in years. His breath didn't catch. It didn't need to. His entire body recognized it before his mind finished processing. He sat back slightly, eyes still locked on the screen. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know you." Not the device, the system behind it, or what it used to be. It wasn't enough to reconstruct everything. Too much time had passed, too many details had been buried, overwritten, erased by design. But pieces were there, enough to form a direction, a mission that had never been filed properly, a set of operations that didn't exist in official records. Caleb's hand hovered near the controls, not touching. Not yet. Behind him, the snow shifted softly. He didn't turn immediately. He didn't need to. Coda had moved. He could feel it in the change of space more than hear it. A few seconds later, she stepped into his peripheral vision, closer than before, not hesitant, not cautious, deliberate. She approached the edge of the exposed device, lowered her head slightly, then placed one paw, carefully, almost precisely, on the corner of the casing, not pressing, not testing, resting. Caleb turned his head then, looking at her fully. Their eyes met. No urgency, no expectation, just alignment. For the first time since the road, it didn't feel like she was leading him anywhere. It felt like she had brought him here, and whatever came next was his. Caleb looked back at the screen. The code continued to scroll, slow but steady, like something remembering itself piece by piece. He didn't reach for it again. Not yet. Instead, he sat there in the cold, one hand resting against the edge of the device, the other loose at his side, and let the weight of recognition settle without forcing it into shape. Some things, once pulled back into the light, didn't arrive as answers. They arrived as consequences. The device stayed where it was. Caleb didn't turn it off, didn't pack it up, didn't move it another inch. He left it exposed in the shallow cut of snow behind the cabin, the external battery humming faintly as it fed life back into something that had been meant to stay dormant. He stood there for a while longer, not studying the screen anymore, but not looking away either. Then he disconnected the power. Not out of caution, out of instinct. The kind that told him timing mattered more than answers. Coda shifted once as the screen dimmed, her paw sliding off the casing without resistance. She didn't react to the loss of light, didn't lean in, didn't retreat. Her role in this part had ended. Caleb wiped his bare hand against his jacket, then pulled his glove back on. The cold had started to bite deeper now, sinking past the surface. He glanced toward the cabin. Not finished. he said quietly. This time, Coda followed. The cabin felt different when he stepped inside again. Not colder, not darker, just narrower, as if the space had adjusted to what he now knew, or almost knew, and closed in around it. Caleb didn't go back to the main room. He moved directly toward the hallway. There were 3 doors, one partially open, one closed, one hanging slightly off its hinges. He chose the one that had been closed, no hesitation. The door creaked faintly as he pushed it open, the sound thin and dry, like something unused rather than broken. Inside, a small bedroom. Bed frame, mattress still intact, though sagging at the center, a dresser against the far wall, one chair near the window, angled slightly as if someone had once sat there regularly. Caleb stepped in, eyes moving not across the room but through it, looking for absence, not what was there, what wasn't. The dresser had been opened, not violently, systematically. Top drawer pulled out, contents shifted but not scattered. Second drawer the same. Third drawer untouched. He paused there, then crouched, pulled the third drawer open. Nothing. Clothes, folded but old, a blanket stuffed into the corner. No sign of interference, which meant... He stood again, turning slowly toward the floor. The boards beneath the bed didn't match the rest. Slight difference in color, subtle variation in grain, enough to miss if you weren't looking for pattern. Caleb moved the chair aside first, then the mattress, then the frame. Each step deliberate, quiet, controlled. When the space was clear, he knelt again and pressed his fingers along the seam of the boards. There. A slight give. Not loose, designed. He slid the pry bar into the edge and applied pressure, not force, just enough to test the hinge. The board lifted, clean, no splintering, no resistance. Whoever built this had planned for access. Beneath it, a shallow compartment, not large, not deep, just enough. Caleb leaned in, one hand braced on the floor, the other reaching down into the dark. His fingers brushed paper first, then something firmer beneath it. He pulled the contents up carefully, laying them out on the floor beside him. Maps, folded multiple times, edges worn but not damaged, markings scattered across different areas, not clustered, not linear. Points, connected only by intent. Then the notes, handwritten, short lines, abbreviations, coordinates reduced to fragments, as if the writer had assumed full context would be remembered, not referenced. Caleb didn't read them all at once. He scanned, letting recognition build instead of forcing it. The handwriting wasn't neat, but it was controlled, minimal, efficient. He'd seen it before, not in years, but muscle memory didn't forget details like that. He flipped one page, then another, then... He stopped. A name. Not circled, not underlined, just written once, in the same hand as everything else. Marcus Hale. Caleb didn't move for a long second. His breathing didn't change, his posture didn't shift. But something in him, something older than thought, tightened. Marcus had been reported missing, not dead, not confirmed, just gone. No body, no recovery, no closure. Caleb had accepted that, or told himself he had. He sat back slowly, the paper still in his hand. No, he murmured. Not denial. Correction. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course. He stood, walked back into the main room and toward the window. One bar flickered, then dropped, then came back. He lifted the phone slightly, adjusting position by inches. Another bar. Unstable, but enough. He scrolled through his contacts without hesitation, stopped on a name he hadn't touched in years. Owen Mercer. Caleb pressed call. The line didn't ring right away. Then, static. A click. A breath on the other end. Yeah? The voice was older than Caleb remembered. Not weaker, just worn thinner. Owen. Silence, not confusion, recognition. You don't call unless something's already gone wrong, Owen said. Caleb leaned his shoulder against the window frame, eyes still on the tree line outside. I need you to check something. That's not how this works anymore. It is today. A pause. Longer this time. What did you find? Owen asked. Caleb didn't answer directly. Do you still have access? Define access. Enough to tell me if a name still exists. Owen exhaled slowly on the other end. That depends on the name. Caleb looked down at the paper in his hand, then back out the window. Marcus Hale. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was active, processing. Caleb could almost see Owen on the other end, leaning back slightly, eyes narrowing, running through systems he shouldn't still be connected to. When Owen spoke again, his voice had changed. Not louder, just more precise. That file's locked. How locked? Above anything you ever saw in the field. Caleb's grip tightened slightly on the phone. Status? Another pause, shorter. Listed as unresolved, no confirmation of death. That's what we were told. Yeah, Owen said quietly. That's what you were told. Caleb didn't respond. He didn't need to. Owen continued. There's more. Say it. The operation tied to that name, it's not just buried, it's been scrubbed, cross-reference is gone, supporting logs missing. It's like someone went back and erased the edges. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, not in frustration, in alignment. So he didn't disappear, Caleb said. No, Owen replied. He was removed. The word sat heavier than the cold. Removed. Not lost, not killed. Taken out of the record. Caleb shifted slightly, glancing toward the hallway, toward the room where the compartment lay open beneath the floor. He was here, Caleb said. Another pause. You're not supposed to know that, Owen replied. I do now. A faint sound came through the line, something like a chair moving, or fabric shifting. Owen was standing, or pacing. Listen to me, Owen said, voice lower now. If you've touched anything tied to that operation, anything, then someone knows. Maybe not yet, but they will. Caleb looked down at his hand, at the faint smear of dirt beneath his glove. I powered something on. The silence that followed was immediate, sharp. How long? Long enough. Then you need to shut it down. I already did. Not the device, Owen said. Everything. Caleb didn't answer. Owen's voice hardened. You don't understand the scope of what you're in right now. Caleb's gaze shifted to the door, to Coda. She stood just inside the threshold, not watching him, watching the room behind him. I understand enough, Caleb said. Then understand this, Owen replied. If they find out you're connected to that signal, if they trace it, you won't get a second chance to walk away. Caleb's jaw set slightly. They didn't give him one. Owen didn't respond to that. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, get out of there, Owen said quietly. Now. The line went dead. Caleb lowered the phone slowly, didn't check for signal again, didn't call back. He stood there in the dim light of the cabin, the maps and notes still spread across the floor behind him, the name still visible where he had left it. Marcus Hale, not gone, not dead, just erased. Caleb turned his head slightly toward Coda. She met his gaze this time. No movement, no signal, just presence. He nodded once, not to her, to the reality settling into place. Yeah, he said under his breath. I get it now. Caleb didn't go back to the device, not immediately. Instead, he returned to the truck. The engine turned over slower this time, as if the cold had crept deeper into the metal while he'd been inside the cabin. He let it idle, hands resting loosely on the wheel, eyes unfocused, not looking at the road, not looking at the trees, just holding space. Marcus Hale. The name had weight now, not memory, not loss, presence. Caleb shifted into gear and turned the truck around. There was a small town 12 miles south. He had passed the sign on his way in, barely registered it, a place that existed mostly for people who needed it, not for those passing through. That was where you went when you needed context without attention. The road curved down along the slope, the snow thinning in patches where sunlight held longer. The forest pulled back gradually, giving way to open stretches dotted with low structures, sheds, trailers, the occasional fenced property that looked like it had been built one decision at a time rather than planned. The town didn't announce itself. It just appeared. A gas pump, a narrow grocery store with a hand-painted sign, a diner with blinds half drawn, and across from it, a building that might have been a supply store once, now doubling as something else, mail, tools, conversation. Caleb parked without drawing attention. Coda remained in the passenger seat, head low but alert, eyes tracking movement outside. She hadn't tried to get out again. Not this time. That, too, meant something. Inside, the air was warmer, carrying the scent of coffee that had been sitting too long and wood that had been burned more out of habit than necessity. There were only two people inside. a man behind the counter, thin, gray-bearded, reading something folded in half, and a woman near the shelves, sorting items with a rhythm that suggested she wasn't in a hurry but didn't waste time either. She noticed Caleb first, not with surprise, not with curiosity, with assessment. Her eyes moved over him once, quick, practiced, then returned to what she was doing. That was enough to tell him she wasn't local in the way most people were, or at least not passive. Caleb approached the counter, but his attention stayed angled toward her. "Coffee?" the man asked without looking up. "Not today," Caleb replied. The woman set down a box and turned. Up close, she was in her late 40s, maybe early 50s. Solid build, not heavy, not thin, the kind of strength that came from years of work that didn't involve offices. Her hair, dark blonde threaded with gray, was pulled back loosely, strands escaping near her temples. Her face wasn't soft, but it wasn't hard either. It had lines that came from weather, not worry. "You're not from here," she said. Not a question. Caleb met her gaze. "No." She nodded once, as if confirming something she already knew. "You drove past the cabins on the ridge," she said. Again. Not a question. Caleb didn't answer right away. "Maybe." She studied him for a second longer, then wiped her hands on a cloth and stepped closer. "Name's Clara Boone," she said. "I used to manage that place, before it stopped being worth managing." Caleb nodded. "Caleb." She didn't offer her hand, neither did he. Clara glanced briefly toward the window, then back at him. "You went inside one of them." This time it was a statement. Caleb leaned slightly against the counter, not fully settling. "Why do you say that?" She gave a small, humorless smile. "Because anyone who doesn't come back looking like they missed something." Caleb considered that, then said, "Someone's been staying there." Clara didn't look surprised. "Yeah." "How long?" "Couple months, maybe more." She walked past him, gesturing lightly for him to follow. Not commanding, not inviting, just moving in a direction that assumed he would keep up. He did. They stepped outside, the cold air sharper after the warmth inside. Clara leaned against the side of the building, arms crossed loosely, eyes on the distant line of trees. "He didn't talk much," she said. "Didn't come into town unless he had to, but he paid. Cash, always exact." Caleb watched her profile as she spoke. "No name?" She shook her head. "Didn't ask. People out here don't ask questions they don't want answers to." A pause. Then, "But he wasn't hiding." That caught. Caleb shifted slightly. "What makes you say that?" Clara glanced at him just for a second. "Because hiding looks different," she said. "Hiding avoids patterns. This guy had them." Caleb said nothing. Clara continued. "He came in every 10 days or so, same time of day, same things, fuel, canned food, batteries, not stockpiling, maintaining." She pushed off the wall and turned to face him more directly now. "And he watched." "Watched what?" Caleb asked. "Everything." Her tone didn't change. No rush, no tension, just tracking, like he was waiting for something to line up. Caleb exhaled slowly. "Did anyone else notice?" Clara shrugged. "Out here, noticing doesn't mean acting." Then her expression shifted, slightly. 3 nights ago," she said. "Truck came through, late. No lights on the road until it hit the turn." Caleb's attention sharpened. "Local?" "No." "How do you know?" "Because locals don't drive like they're trying not to be seen. They just don't go out that late." She uncrossed her arms. "Next morning, I went up there. Didn't go inside. Didn't need to. You can tell when something's been disturbed." Caleb held her gaze. "And?" Clara didn't answer right away. She looked back toward the trees again. "He was gone," she said finally. Not dramatic, not heavy, just stated. "And the place?" Caleb asked. "Torn through. Not wrecked, just searched." Caleb nodded once. That matched. Clara shifted her weight, then added, almost as an afterthought, "He had a dog." Caleb's eyes flicked toward the truck. Coda hadn't moved. "Same one?" Clara asked. Caleb didn't confirm. Clara didn't press. He didn't let it roam, she said. Kept it close, always aware of it, like it wasn't just company. Caleb let that settle, then asked, "Did it come into town?" "Once," Clara said. "Waited outside, didn't react to anyone, just watched the door until he came back out." A beat. "That's not a stray." "No," Caleb said quietly. "It's not." They stood there for a moment, the wind shifting lightly across the open space between buildings. Clara tilted her head slightly. "You're not here by accident either." Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. She nodded again, as if that was confirmation enough. "Whatever he was doing up there," she said, "it wasn't about staying hidden." Caleb looked back toward the road. "Then what was it?" Clara considered that, then said, "Waiting for the right thing to show up." The drive back felt different. Not heavier. Clearer. Caleb didn't rush, didn't take the turns any faster, but his focus had shifted, from finding to assembling. The cabin wasn't a refuge. It was a position. Marcus hadn't been avoiding anything. He'd been holding ground. When Caleb reached the clearing again, Coda stepped out of the truck without hesitation. No jumping this time, no collapse. She moved with purpose, slower than before but direct. Caleb followed her past the cabin, back toward the disturbed patch of snow. The device sat where he'd left it, untouched. Good. He crouched beside it, not activating it this time, just looking. At the casing, at the angle it had been placed, at the direction it faced. Then he looked up, past the trees, toward a line that wasn't visible unless you understood what you were looking for. Signal direction, not broadcast, collection. Caleb nodded slowly. "You weren't calling out," he said under his breath. "You were listening." Coda stood beside him now, close enough that he could feel the faint heat of her body through the cold air. Not leaning, not seeking contact, just there. Caleb reached out, not to pet her, not to comfort, but to steady himself against something that was real. His hand rested briefly against the side of her neck. She didn't move, didn't react, just accepted the contact as if it wasn't unusual. Caleb pulled his hand back after a moment. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I get it." Caleb didn't rush it. That was the first thing that changed. In the past, decisions like this came fast, driven by urgency, reinforced by training, executed before doubt had time to surface. But this wasn't a battlefield. There was no team behind him, no command above him, no mission clock counting down, just a device in the snow, and a choice no one had assigned him. He crouched beside it again, brushing a thin layer of frost off the casing with the back of his glove. The metal was colder now, the battery pack quiet but still holding charge. It had waited, like everything else here. Coda settled a few feet behind him, lowering herself carefully into the snow. She didn't watch his hands this time. She watched the tree line, not alert, not tense, just aware. Caleb reached into his jacket and pulled the cable free. He didn't connect it immediately. Instead, he looked out across the clearing, letting his eyes trace the invisible lines Marcus must have followed. The arc of signal capture, the blind spots, the coverage gaps. This wasn't communication. It was surveillance. Not broad, targeted. Caleb exhaled slowly. "You were listening to something specific," he said under his breath, "and you stayed here because it mattered." He connected the cable. The device flickered once, then came alive in a low, muted glow. No bright display, no welcoming interface. Just a narrow line of data beginning to scroll, slow at first, then stabilizing. Caleb leaned closer, not reading everything, looking for structure, pattern. There. A format he hadn't seen in years. Not standard military, not civilian. Something in between, used in operations that didn't officially exist. Encrypted identifiers, segmented bursts, timing irregular enough to avoid detection, but consistent enough to track if you knew what to look for. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "They're still running it," he said. Not surprised, just confirmed. The device pulsed once, subtle, almost easy to miss. Then a response came through. Not full communication, just a return signal, a handshake. Caleb froze. The data line shifted, locking into a different rhythm, faster, sharper. He didn't touch anything, didn't interrupt it, just watched. The signal carried no voice, no text, only a string, an identification code. Caleb didn't recognize all of it, but he didn't need to. He recognized enough: the structure, the classification, the kind of thing that didn't get sent unless someone believed the receiver already understood the risk. His breathing slowed, not from calm, but from control. "They think this is still his position," he said quietly. Coda didn't move, didn't react, but her ears shifted once, adjusting slightly toward the direction of the wind. Caleb noticed, filed it away. Then his phone vibrated. He didn't reach for it immediately. He let it ring once, twice, then pulled it out. Signal was weak, but stable enough. "Owen." Caleb answered without speaking. Static. Then, "Tell me you didn't power it back up." Owen's voice was sharper now. No hesitation, no restraint. Caleb looked down at the device. "I did." A breath on the other end. Not frustration, calculation. "Then we have a problem." Caleb didn't respond. Owen continued. "I got a ping," he said. "Not from you, from the system. Something flagged an active node, same signature you described earlier." Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. "How fast?" "Faster than it should be," Owen said. "Which means someone's watching for it." A pause. Then, "They're not just tracking data anymore. They're tracking access." Caleb shifted his weight slightly, scanning the tree line again. Still nothing. Still quiet. "How many?" he asked. "Don't know," Owen replied. "But I can tell you this. Whoever's tied into that network, they don't leave loose ends." Caleb glanced at Coda. She hadn't moved. Still steady, still present. He turned back to the device. The signal continued to pulse, waiting, not pushing, like it expected something in return. "What happens if I respond?" Caleb asked. Silence. Then, "You confirm the position," Owen said. "And if I don't, you stay invisible. For now." Caleb considered that, then looked down again at the code scrolling across the screen. There was something about it, something deliberate, not just data, structure, intent. Marcus hadn't just set up a receiver, he'd left a point of decision, a place where someone like Caleb, would have to choose what came next. "You think he wanted this found?" Caleb asked. Owen didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. "I think he knew it would be." Caleb let that sit. The cold didn't bother him anymore. The wind didn't register, only the weight of what was in front of him. Destroy it, walk away, or step into something that had already cost one man everything. Coda shifted then, not forward, not toward the device. She simply moved closer, just enough that her shoulder brushed lightly against his arm. No urgency, no push, just contact. Caleb didn't look at her, but he felt it, and for the first time since he'd stepped into the clearing, he realized she wasn't leading anymore. She wasn't guiding him toward anything. She was staying. That was different. That mattered more. Caleb exhaled slowly, then reached down. Not to disconnect the device, not to destroy it. He adjusted the angle slightly, aligning it more precisely with the direction of the incoming signal. A small movement, but intentional. Owen's voice cut through again. "What are you doing?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. Then, finishing what he started. The line went quiet. Not disconnected. Just silent. Owen didn't argue, didn't try to stop him, because he understood, or because he knew it wouldn't matter. Caleb watched the device for another moment. The signal stabilized. Stronger now. Clearer. Whatever it was collecting, it was working. And now, so was Caleb. He reached down and powered it off. Not in panic, not in retreat, but in control. The signal cut clean. No trailing data, no residual noise. Gone. He pulled the cable free and stood. The clearing felt different again. Not closed in, not narrow. Open, but exposed. Coda stood with him, matching his movement without hesitation. Caleb looked once more toward the cabin, then back toward the road. "We're not done," he said quietly. Not to her, not to Owen, to the situation itself, because now he understood. Marcus hadn't needed rescue. He had needed someone to decide, and that part was still unfinished. Caleb didn't touch the device again that night. He didn't need to. Everything it could tell him it already had. The rest wasn't information. It was consequence. The cabin stood quiet behind him, the trees holding their distance in the way forests did when something unseen had passed through and left its weight behind. The sky had begun to dim, not yet dark, but losing color. The kind of gray that erased edges instead of revealing them. Coda followed him inside without hesitation. Not ahead, not leading, just staying close enough that he didn't need to check if she was there. That, more than anything, told him the nature of what came next. Inside, the cabin no longer felt like a place someone had occupied. It felt like a place someone had finished with. Caleb moved through it once, not searching this time, closing loops. He gathered the maps, folded them cleanly, took the notes, Marcus's handwriting, steady even in shorthand, and slid them into the inner pocket of his jacket, not for memory, for transfer. He paused briefly at the doorway of the bedroom. The compartment lay open beneath the floorboards, the lifted panel leaning slightly against the wall. He didn't put it back. Some things weren't meant to be restored. Outside, the device waited. Caleb crouched beside it again, pulling a small kit from the back of his truck. Older gear, but maintained, enough to do what needed doing. He connected a different line this time, not for power, for extraction. The process wasn't fast. Data like this never was. It moved in controlled bursts, fragments assembling piece by piece into something whole, only if you knew how to hold it together. Caleb didn't watch the screen. He watched the horizon, the forest, the absence of movement. Not fear, not paranoia, just respect for what had already been set in motion. Coda lay nearby, her body angled toward the road now instead of the trees. A subtle shift, but intentional. Caleb noticed, didn't comment. The transfer completed with a soft tone. He disconnected the line and sealed the storage unit, checking it once before slipping it into his jacket beside the notes. Then he pulled out his phone. Signal was thin, but enough. He didn't call Owen. He didn't use anything that could be traced easily. Instead, he opened a secure channel, one that hadn't been active in years, one that required more memory than interface. His fingers moved without hesitation. Old habits. Old roots. He transmitted the package, not to a central system, not to command, to Owen directly, a point-to-point path, unofficial, untracked, at least not in the ways that mattered immediately. The send completed. Caleb didn't wait for confirmation, didn't need it. He knew Owen would see it, eventually. The device sat in the snow, silent now. No signal, no life, just hardware. Caleb looked at it for a long moment, then reached into the truck again, this time for something simpler. Fuel. He didn't pour it all at once, didn't rush. He moved with the same deliberate rhythm he'd used all day, measured, precise. The cabin first. A line along the outer walls, enough to carry flame, not explode. He stepped inside briefly, placing small points where the fire would take naturally. Old wood, dry fabric, structural joints weakened by time. Not destruction for its own sake. A controlled ending. When he stepped back outside, the air felt thinner. Not colder, just expectant. Coda stood near the truck now, watching him. No resistance, no confusion, just observation. Caleb struck the match. For a second, nothing happened. Then the flame caught. Slow, deliberate. It spread the way fire does when it's given the right conditions. Not violent, not immediate, but inevitable. The cabin took it first. Then the edges. Then the interior. The wood didn't crack loudly. It sighed, collapsed in on itself in stages. Caleb didn't move, didn't step back. He stood there long enough to make sure it was done right, not erased, closed. The device came last. He placed it at the edge of the fire line, letting the heat build before pushing it forward with his boot. The casing blackened, warped, then split slightly under pressure. Whatever remained inside it would not function again. Not here. Not for anyone. The fire burned into the night. Caleb didn't stay to watch it out. He returned to the truck, brushing snow from the windshield before climbing in. For a moment, he just sat there. Hands on the wheel, engine off, listening, not to the fire, to the absence of everything else. Coda moved first. She circled once, then jumped into the passenger seat. No hesitation, no glance back, no signal needed. Caleb started the engine. The headlights cut through the dim light, the road ahead barely visible beneath a thin layer of fresh snow. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. Not when he pulled away. Not when the trees closed in again. Not when the glow behind him faded into nothing. The drive was quiet. Miles passed without markers, the world reduced to road, snow, and the steady rhythm of the engine holding its line. Coda rested her head low, not asleep, but no longer scanning. At ease. or as close to it as she could get. Caleb adjusted his grip slightly on the wheel. There was no destination programmed, no route selected, just forward. That was enough. Hours later, the signal returned, weak but steady. His phone vibrated once, a message, no name, just a number he recognized. Owen. Caleb didn't pull over, didn't stop. He glanced at the screen briefly, then returned his eyes to the road. Data received. A pause, then another line, but not just by me. Caleb didn't react, didn't respond. The message stayed on the screen for a moment longer before he locked it and set the phone aside. Coda shifted slightly, adjusting her position. Not reacting, just settling. Caleb exhaled slowly. The road stretched ahead, the horizon just beginning to lighten with the first hint of morning. For the first time in years, there was no instinct pulling him back, no unfinished loop behind him, no need to return, only what was ahead, uncertain, unmarked, real. He kept driving. Some choices don't come with orders, clear answers, or a way back. In this story, Caleb wasn't asked to be a hero. He wasn't given a mission. He was simply left with a decision, whether to walk away or to carry something that still mattered, even when no one was watching. That's where real character lives. Not in the moment of action, but in the quiet space where you choose what kind of person you are going to be, without certainty, without recognition, and without guarantees. In everyday life, we face moments like that more often than we realize. Small decisions, silent responsibilities, things we could ignore, but don't. And sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't bring closure. It just opens a new road. If this story stayed with you, share where you're watching from and tell me, what would you have done in his place? And if you believe stories like this matter, consider subscribing. It helps us keep telling the ones that remind us who we are when no one else is looking. May you find the strength to choose what is right, even when it's difficult, and the peace to keep moving forward when there's no clear map.